Well, hello, welcome back to the show. I'm Joe Hyde, the publisher of San Angelo Live. Today I have the most interesting guest.
You keep saying that. You're the most interesting person.
No, you are.
I'm just a humble city servant.
This is Bob Bluthardt, and if you haven't met him or seen one of our previous interviews, he is the director of the Fort Concho, National Historic Landmark.
The most interesting fort, we'll say that.
Most interesting fort, and the most preserved fort. I mean, have you been down to Menard to see that one down there?
That's a good one. Now, we're very pleased to be called one of the best preserved frontier forts west of Mississippi. It just gets down to luck and being built out of limestone and having visionary people like Mrs. Carson almost 100 years ago who decided, hey, this is worth something. Let's save it.
Was Miss Carson like a contemporary of Miss Shannon?
Similar. Shannon Hospital and the Shannon family's relationship are from the 1920s and 30s, so that was a going and blowing time in San Angelo. Oil money came in, and a lot happened. I mean, the new city hall, the new courthouse, the founding of ASU, several churches, Santa Rita, Cactus Hotel, and the preservation of Fort Concho.
Sealy Flats and the Roosevelt Hotel.
Well, the Roosevelt later. Sealy was 08. That was a little before that.
Was it? Yeah. You know what Sealy Flats was in 1908. You're right.
But it was the Cactus that kind of threw it out of business because once you built the Cactus, Sealy looked pretty
Nobody
tidy.
wanted to go in a flop house with a Sealy mattress.
Well, it was built, I think, as a drummer's hotel. You know what a drummer is.
No, what's a drummer?
A drummer is a salesman. They used to ride the rails, and they'd come to town with their suitcases. You ever see the Music Man?
Yes.
And all the drummers there on the deal, and the guy with the anvils in a suitcase.
There you go.
So the Sealy was for people like that, and several of the hotels in the area were like that, and the salesman would give their cards out, the newspaper would print an ad, and people would come by and place their orders based on the wares or pictures, and then they get on the train.
Like that's kind of like when Sears and Roebuck became
catalog kings.
The catalog king, yeah.
Yeah, they were pre-catalog era, so to speak. It was mostly for the businesses downtown. So, but I'm glad to see Sealy Flats kind of made it, and too bad about Rod Bridgman. Good guy.
Yeah, he passed away. Rod Bridgman was the
visionary
of downtown.
He was visionary before things really got going, and made a great commitment to the Sealy Flats and music and restauranting and events. And I was sad to see the news of his passing.
Yeah, I remember Rod back in the 2000s. He would come by, and this long-haired, gray-haired guy, and he'd be talking all the virtues of downtown. I'm like, dude. There's nothing down there.
Well, he was, and kind of like some other organizations that made the sort of the beachhead in the 80s and early 90s, I think history has shown it turned out okay.
Yeah. All right. So,
but meanwhile, back at the fort.
Before the fort, this is well before the fort, and before the boom of the 1920s, this place was, kind of like the frontier land, and you had a stagecoach come through.
Only way to get from here to there.
And there's a guy who used to work for me on a contract basis. His name was Ed Blackburn, and he had a ranch. He had a family ranch up there, just south of Robert Lee,
right,
off of 208, and it had these hills. And he had found some artifacts from the stagecoach that would used to run through his property.
Right, route went through there.
And anyway, I was reading up on the stagecoach, and the thing that I don't get about it, I mean, here's a situation that lasted maybe, 4 or 5 years of history?
4 years pre-Civil War and not too much longer after the Civil War.
Every Western you see, there's a stagecoach comes to town, right? And they want to see who's on the stagecoach.
Yeah.
It's like the stagecoach was there for 50 years.
It's the 2 o'clock stage, but it's 5 o'clock.
Especially on Bonanza, But they had the southern route and the northern route kind of came through here, and I guess they were both headed toward Horsehead Crossing.
Yeah, well, they hooked up and then had the single route all the way through El Paso del Norte.
El Paso del Norte, meaning the north, just north El Paso.
Pass through El Paso.
Right. Could you imagine riding a stagecoach from, let's say, San Antonio to El Paso?
If you look at a stagecoach, and we had one on display for years, it's now at the Wells Fargo Bank downtown. You say, oh, that'd be nice for 4 or 5 people. Try 10 or 12. Those things were built to maximize people and freight because it was a commercial operation. Now, There was more money in the mail, as we were talking about, and government payrolls, which the Army mostly took care of. But you had to squeeze as many bodies on those things as possible. So you had the driver and the shotgun on top. and you had 3 or 4 abreast on either side on the inside, but you had folks just hanging all over the thing.
I don't think I'd want to do it. I mean, and you didn't go that far. Your legs were like, what, 20, 30 miles?
15 to 20, maybe a little more in areas where there weren't water stops, but you're right. It was a constant, changing of stations. And bad food, weevily pork, bad coffee, crunchy bread, and it just took forever. And there's no, well, we'll take a 12-hour break here. No, it was all about time. It was all about meeting the schedule.
So they would change out the horses.
Change the horses, and you got maybe at some stops, you got a quick meal, and away you go. And if you look at the price for what they were charging, and if you prorate that to today's dollars, I mean, you could take a supersonic jet for the same amount of money.
Is that right?
Yeah, it was $100 to $150. And you prorate that times 20, which would be about the exchange, of that time to today. And the whole point was, if you wanted to get before 1867 from the east part of the country to the west part of the country, that was it.
Yeah, you did. The Transcontinental Railroad hadn't really.
That was 1867.
Yeah.
And the only other option was to hop a boat and go all the way down through the isthmus. There was no isthmus, all the way through Cape of Good Horn and all the way up and back, and that took 2 to 3 months.
Actually, I'm reading the memoirs of General William Tecumseh Sherman.
One of my favorite people.
He is my hero.
He's one of my favorite historical personages.
Do not tell my Georgian relatives.
No, he's not very popular. Still isn't.
But in his early days, his first assignment was California.
Yes.
And to get there, he had to report to New York, hop on a steamer.
Correct.
And go all the way around the Cape of Good Hope. I mean, there was no Panama Canal, nothing like that.
No, Teddy took care of that later.
It took him 215 days.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
215 days. I'm like, so this guy's riding on a boat for almost a year. I mean, there's 365 days in a year. So I was like, my goodness.
A lot of time to think about your career and why am I doing this?
Yes. Well,
that's if you live, because shipboard fever and, again, bad food and bad medical conditions, a lot of people didn't make it.
And where are you sleeping? You're probably in a bunk bed or something. Or a hammock.
He probably had some quarters that were a little better than steerage, but it's still not comfortable.
Yeah. But that is incredible. And it kind of shows you back in, the pre-Civil War, how difficult it was to get anything done. I mean, things just moved at a snail's pace because for Sherman to get all the way to California, and then you get to California, he gets orders to come back. I'm like, no.
He wasn't there long, no. And when he was there, it was during the post-gold rush, and inflation was terrible, and he wasn't making much money. So he, like many Army officers, had to decide, is this really worth it?
Yeah.
And many of them only lasted, a short term after their West Point days, and just retired and went off someplace else. Like Grant, he came back, and the rest, of course, is history.
Right. Well, he came back to St. Louis. And the other interesting thing was they called him to Washington and said, hey, you want to be a general? And he says, no, not really. I just want to, I'll do my duty, but I don't really want to lead anything. And next thing you know, he's leading everything.
He's a 2 and 3 star, yeah. Well, the events make the man.
Yes, they do. They do. So the Fort Concho, obviously this is current time, so you have lots of stuff going on.
We have a big weekend. Unfortunately, none of it to do with stagecoaches, but we can talk about whatever makes you happy.
By the way, before we get into the Fort Concho, the reason why stagecoaches ended in San Angelo is because they were coming back from El Paso, and they stopped into Fort Chadbourne, which is the fort north of here.
Right.
And they found out it had been taken over by the Confederates.
And that took care of everything.
And that was the end of the stagecoaches through here.
Yeah, 1861, when the Civil War started, passage through the Confederacy was not very safe.
Right.
So
Anyway, Fort Concho.
Well, this weekend, it's a big weekend. Saturday, we're going to have National Cowboy Day. That'll be from 9 a.m. to 10:30 at the Quartermaster Building, the Old Fine Arts Museum, where we have a great Western art show. 9 to 9:30, we'll have breakfast pastries and fruit and coffee. And then at 9:30, Laura Huckabee, who's the curator at the Art Museum, will do a little walk around about the Western show. And then at 10 o'clock, we'll go outside in the shade, what's left of the shade,
right,
and watch the Concho Cowboys do a shoot-'em-up. They have a lot of fun. And
so they stage a shoot-'em-up.
They have
with real ammunition,
with blanks, and they actually. Otherwise, I mean, you run out of volunteers pretty quick. No, and they also do a little safety demo, so it's all good. But that's 9 9 to 10:30, and it's free, open to all, family friendly, and the art show will be open that day until 4, and it's open until Sunday, August 4. Art's for show and for sale, so if you're looking for some high quality art at relatively inexpensive prices, come on down.
Now, you had the chamber event, the chamber happy hours.
Business after hours, last Tuesday.
And you had these paintings in the gallery. They're in
71 paintings and 2
sculptures. Is that the
sculptures.
Quartermaster Quarters? Is that what that was?
The Quartermaster Gallery.
Right. And these paintings were all around, and they were Western art.
All of them Western. It's organized by the American Plains Artists Association, which is a nationwide group, and it's a juried show. That is, you just don't come in. You have to be selected. We have nothing to do with it. There's a committee that handles it. And it's dedicated, as the name indicates, to the promotion and heritage of the American Great Plains. So you got cowboys and Indians and cattle and sheep and all sorts of stuff.
We're not part of the Great Plains.
We're sort of at the bottom end of the Great Plains.
I mean, Lubbock is the South Plains. So what
still
are we?
Pretty, we're South Plains.
We're still South kind of plains?
We're not plain, but we're close there. We're also bottom of Tornado Alley, but we don't have a show on that either.
Yeah, that's true. And well, the one of the greatest TV shows or TV series I've watched in the last decade is 1883 about Yellowstone.
Mm-hmm. I have only seen clips. Either I don't have the right cable channel or the ball game was on.
I know.
So.
You got to figure out what streaming channel to buy, and then you buy it.
But I've seen enough on Facebook to see it's pretty well done.
It took them forever to cross these rivers, like the Red River.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they would park, and then they'd
wait.
They'd wait.
There were no bridges. Actually, this reflects one of the leading accidental causes of death in those days, which was drowning.
Right.
People would pitch their camps near a creek for the water and not pay attention to the weather. Well, how could they pay attention to it? There was no forecast or anything.
They didn't have their app.
There was no app. WFAA wasn't on yet, and they would have a thunderstorm, say 20 miles away, and that water has to go someplace, and it would just literally wash them away.
But you can see these paintings in the Quartermaster. You can go there anytime, right?
Anytime, Tuesday through Saturday, 10 to 4, Sundays, 1:30 to 4:30.
Is there some kind of voting or something that y'all are doing?
Yeah, you can vote for your favorite painting. This is a democratic, small d, by the way, democratic voting.
Don't want to get into politics right now, do we?
Not me. You can vote for your favorite painting, but it's not Chicago. You don't vote early and often, so it's one vote per day per person, and then the top vote getters come back for the show next year. So
I see.
That's how we do the off-year show.
And then also, if you're rich, you can go buy the paintings.
Even if you're not rich, I bought one last year.
Did you really?
Yeah, it was under $700, but it was a nice little painting.
So your pricing's 100 to thousands.
Well, it's more like the minimum is the 5 to 700 range, and the really large, good, intense ones are 3 to 5,000.
Gotcha.
But for a handcrafted painting of this quality, that's a pretty good deal.
So for you in Santa Rita, you need to decorate the walls of your house. Go to the Quartermaster.
And a percentage goes to the association, and a small percentage goes to help support the fort and bring the show back next year.
There you go.
Well, let's talk Sunday.
All right, what happens Sunday?
Sunday is National Buffalo Soldier Day.
Uh-oh.
Why is it Sunday? It's July 28th. It's the 158th, to my ciphering in my head, 158th anniversary of the act of Congress that created the Buffalo Soldiers. So,
all right, in 30 seconds or less, tell me what a Buffalo Soldier is in case we have someone who's just now graduated from high school watching this.
A Buffalo Soldier was the nickname given by the Native American warriors to black troops seen for the first time in the American West because of their curly, kinky hair and their courage.
Okay. And the Buffalo Soldiers were stationed at Fort Concho
They
primarily?
were. Well, not primarily. They were stationed all over the West, but Fort Concho had elements of all 4 regiments, and that's a bit of a unique thing for us.
And so one of the streets that is next to Fort Concho is Henry O. Flipper.
Named after the first African-American graduate of West Point, Henry O. Flipper.
Right.
So the memorial across the street from the fort, right next to the Paseo, is where we'll start at 2. And then we will shift to the air-conditioned commissary, where we will have a talk by C.A. Majan of the West Texas Archaeology Society about the Concho Mail Station, which is a historic site still under development with the Texas Historical Commission and the city, and it was staffed and protected by Buffalo Soldiers.
There you go.
So lots to learn and free snacks and food.
All right, so do you have any more events?
We do in August, where maybe next month we can talk about Fest Parker. We got the film festival.
Yeah. Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Fest Parker, yes.
Dan O'Boone and Davy Crockett.
Before you go, I want to ask for some clarification on this. In my reading, I'm only about a third of the way through the Sherman. The memoirs of William T. Sherman are written like you can read it, and it's just like normal English. It's not like 1875.
He was a very intelligent man and had a great sense of history.
Yes, I mean it's some of it gets kind of raw. The raw data he has, like his dispatches he sent to General Havlick or whatever up in St. Louis and stuff. But he talks about two things that seemed very important to the Army back then: was the commissary and the quartermaster.
Right.
What is the commissary and what is the quartermaster?
I can answer that real quick. If you can eat it, it's commissary. Right. Everything else, unless you can shoot it, is quartermaster. Commissary was a building, an office, and a function. It was the person or place or procedure in charge of all Army rations and food. Quartermaster was wagons, transportation, dry goods, equipment, furniture, and everything else, with the exception of weaponry, and that was ordnance.
So one other thing, I've read Grant's memoirs too.
He started as a quartermaster, yes. And that was one of the reasons why in major campaigns he was superior to Lee, both because he knew he had more supplies, but also he knew how to move them and where to go and how to organize.
And in modern warfare, you read about the history of the modern wars, particularly like Desert Storm, the big problem was not the tanks and make sure we have the airplanes there. It was logistics, which is the quartermaster.
Quartermaster is in charge of getting all the stuff you can't eat and shoot to the right place at the right time.
But now they call them logistics officers.
Yeah, they're S1s or something ones or all that modern stuff.
AFSC or whatever.
But the Army was very, very much into procedure, and any officer who started in quartermaster or commissary usually was a better commander in the field.
And one of the things that I'll just reiterate, Grant, he learned how to have his armies live off the land, and that's how he was able to get to Vicksburg and survive.
True, and Sherman did the same thing in the March to the Sea,
right,
which makes him extraordinarily unpopular 5 generations later in that
Even
part of the
today,
country.
my family in Georgia says, you can't be reading that.
Sounds like book burning to me.
Yeah, book burning. You can't burn my books. It's on a Kindle.
Sherman was a very effective commander, and of course it all depends on which end of the rifle you were on, but he was probably one of the most effective commanders in the Civil War.
Well, and he was also, I think he had a good outlook of history, because when the Civil War was beginning, and he was the head of that university. What was it called? Louisiana State?
It's LSU now. It was a military school then.
They're in Baton Rouge. He wrote a letter saying, this is crazy for what y'all are thinking of doing. The Civil War thing.
He understood. You
Southerners don't know what you're going to be up against.
He understood that the challenges were far beyond. It's kind of like Clark Gable's little mini speech in Gone with the Wind, where he's not very popular at the garden party. They were saying that, you're not going to whip the Yankees in 6 days or 6 months, maybe not even in 6 years. He understood war, and of course the famous phrase, "War is hell."
Yeah.
And he was right.
And that's what he wrote to the Atlanta City Council, when the Atlanta City Council sent him a letter begging him not to burn Atlanta. And he wrote back and said, "All war is hell."
But he also said that we should give them more of it so they shall not want it.
Yes.
He was not a fan of war, but he understood its purposes.
Yeah. And and it wasn't just like you don't want it in your lifetime. He wanted it to be a generational thing.
Well, his attitude was that you make no friends and you save no people or resources by stretching something out. Hit hard, hit fast, and see it through quickly,
right,
rather than dragging it out. And actually, Schwarzkopf there, and a century plus later, was sort of a student of Sherman.
Right, and a little bit of Grant, because Schwarzkopf was a logistics guy too.
Yeah,
very much a logistics.
Not very popular. It doesn't get you the stars right away, but it definitely makes for a more effective fighting force.
That's right. Anyway, Bob Bluthardt with Fort Concho National Historic Landmark. Big event coming up Saturday. Just recap.
Saturday 9 to 10:30 at the art show at the Quartermaster. Sunday National Buffalo Soldier Day, 2:00 at the Memorial across the street, 2:30 at the Commissary.
All righty.
See you there.
All right. Bob, thank you very much for coming on our
show.
And back to you guys.